Sarah stood amid the wreckage of her garden, heart racing. Everything she'd built was destroyed, and the neighbors, her own neighbors, were responsible. "You'll clean this up," he sneered. But then she remembered something in the contract, one tiny detail no one had seen, one move that would change everything. What happened next? It shocked them all. But let's start from the beginning. It was a calm, bright Saturday morning when Sarah Evans, a proud homeowner in the quiet suburb of Oakwood, stepped into her backyard. The sun shone down on her garden, a peaceful oasis she had carefully cultivated for weeks. Raised garden beds lined the area, bursting with ripe tomatoes, vibrant peppers, and a mix of fresh herbs. Gardening had become her sanctuary, her escape after the painful end of her marriage. But as she walked deeper into her garden, a sickening feeling gripped her. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Someone had destroyed everything she'd worked so hard to build. The wooden frames of her beds were broken, soil scattered across the lawn like a careless afterthought. Her once thriving plants were crushed, their tender stems twisted and bent. The once beautiful garden was now a chaotic mess. As Sarah's gaze moved across the damage, she noticed a figure standing by the fence. It was Greg Palmer, the ever-judgmental HOA representative. His posture was rigid, arms crossed, and the smug expression on his face made her blood boil. "Your garden doesn't meet our HOA standards," he stated coldly, his eyes scanning the destruction with a hint of satisfaction. His voice was flat, as though this was just another matter to deal with, another rule to enforce. Sarah stood frozen, unable to speak at first. The harsh reality of what had just happened began to sink in. "What?" she finally managed to croak, her voice trembling. You did this?" Greg didn't flinch. "We've decided to remove it. You can replant, but this structure—" He waved a dismissive hand at the broken garden beds. "It's against our guidelines. You'll need to fix it according to code." Her heart pounded. The garden that had given her a sense of peace after everything she'd been through had been reduced to rubble by the very people who were supposed to uphold the community's standards. Sarah stood frozen, her eyes fixed on the wreckage of her garden. The air around her felt thick, suffocating. Her breath came in shallow gasps as her heart raced in her chest. She had poured countless hours into that garden, planting, nurturing, and tending to it piece by piece. It was more than just a hobby. It had been her escape, her refuge. Now it lay in ruins, a cruel reminder of how easily something precious could be destroyed. A storm of emotions churned inside her. Rage at the audacity of the HOA, confusion over how they could justify this destruction, and an overwhelming sense of helplessness. The rules were always clear, but this felt personal. They hadn't just removed a garden. They had taken away the one thing that helped her heal. The thought that she might have to tear it all down and start over seemed unbearable. Later that evening, the weight of the day settled heavily on her shoulders as she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the phone in her hand. She needed answers, and she needed them fast. Her lawyer, Jessica Brown, had always been calm under pressure, and Sarah hoped she could provide some clarity. When she explained what had happened, the words spilling out quickly, Jessica listened intently, her voice steady and reassuring. "You have a clause in your HOA agreement that might work in your favor," Jessica said. "There's an exemption for gardens that provide a benefit to the community. It's possible your garden could qualify. Let's take a look at that contract, and we'll see what options we have." Sarah's shoulders, which had been tense and tight, seemed to relax for the first time all day. Her mind, still clouded with frustration, suddenly flickered with the smallest spark of hope. Could there be a way to keep her garden? Could she fight back and maybe even turn this situation around? For the first time since Greg Palmer's harsh words, Sarah allowed herself to feel a glimmer of optimism. There might just be a way to win this, if she could hold on to the strength she still had. The days following her conversation with Jessica were a blur of preparation. Sarah's anger burned in her chest as she pored over the HOA contract, revisiting every clause, every rule. The more she read, the more she understood just how deep the injustice ran. Jessica, with her sharp legal mind, dug through the HOA's guidelines and uncovered something Sarah hadn't noticed before, an unexpected clause hidden in the fine print. The HOA wasn't just wrong about the garden. They had violated a legal loophole. According to the clause, the HOA was either required to accept garden structures like hers, or, if they decided to destroy them, they had to reimburse homeowners for repairs. The realization hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. Greg Palmer and the HOA had not only ignored the rule, but they had intentionally undermined it. This wasn't just a matter of following procedure. It was a deliberate attack, a calculated move to strip her of what was rightfully hers. The injustice made her blood boil. "It's time to go to battle," Sarah muttered to herself, her voice low but firm. She turned to Jessica, her determination burning brighter than ever. "They think they can bulldoze me because they hold all the power, but they're about to learn that I'm not backing down." With a quiet nod of agreement, Jessica filed a formal complaint, setting the wheels of legal action in motion. Within days, Sarah received a letter from the HOA, its tone cold and threatening. It demanded that she cease her pursuit of the matter or face serious consequences. The message was clear. They expected her to back down. But Sarah, now more resolute than ever, wasn't about to let them win. The more they pushed, the more she pressed back. This fight had become bigger than her garden. It was about standing up for her rights, about proving that no one, not even the HOA, could take control of her property without consequences. Every day, Sarah felt the pressure mounting, but with it came a deep sense of purpose. This wasn't just a battle over soil and plants. It was a fight for justice, and she wasn't going to lose. The courtroom battle took weeks, but when the final ruling came down, it was a resounding victory for Sarah. The judge ruled in her favor, stating that the HOA had no right to destroy her garden without offering compensation. Furthermore, the HOA was ordered to pay for the construction of new, even higher-end raised beds, with a generous stipend for her gardening supplies. Greg Palmer, who had initially thought he could push Sarah around, now stood before her in the courtroom, his arrogant smile replaced by a look of defeat. Sarah had won. Her garden was not only restored, but improved. As she walked out of the courtroom, Jessica gave her a supportive pat on the back. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. You stood up for what was right." Sarah smiled, the weight of the victory settling into her chest. The garden would bloom again, not just with plants, but with the knowledge that justice had been done. She had fought for her rights and won.